There are so many different articulations you need to know about when you're talking about bowing a stringed instrument. That's true for double bass. We've got these dots, we've got these dashes. Where to even begin? If you're looking to clear up the confusion, this video is for you. With articulation and just sustaining notes and making notes into different shapes, it's really helpful to think about the human voice. I really think that everything in music, or just about everything, comes from the human voice. And so when we're thinking about this, thinking about consonants and vowels and how we would say or sing different words will really help. And throughout this video, I'm going to be using this Coda bow, their marquee bow. They sent me this to check out, and I really like it. Link in the description below. So for every note, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, even if that note is very short. And I think that's really helpful to think of. I think of there being a continuum of articulations from super duper long, lugubrious, completely connected, to as short as possible. So for the attack of the note, thinking of consonants or vowels I find really helpful. So am I thinking ta, da, la, oo? What kind of beginning does that have? What is the attack? How does the note start? Then what about the sustain? Even in a short note, there's going to be a little bit of a middle. Is that going to sustain? Is it going to crescendo, decrescendo? Where is the note going? And then there's the end of the note. Is it a complete connection where you can't tell, except for the new pitch, where one note starts or the other stops? Is there some decay of the sound, or is there total decay of the sound? And I find it helpful just to keep in mind that the sound is the goal. What sound we are getting, that is the overall goal. So whether you're thinking about doing it off the string or on the string, just remember we're going for a sound, and however we can make that sound, that's what we want to do. And with printed music, the challenge is that there just aren't enough markings to show all the subtleties of what a composer wants to do. I mean, really, we have dots, we have dashes, we have little wedge things, we have a few other things. Some composers write a couple words, most of the time they don't. Maybe there's no marking at all. So it's all about context, it's all about what time was this music written, what other types of music does this composer write. As you get into the more contemporary era, composers will give a little more information, but still it's incredible how vague the indications can be from the composer. And so there's a lot of detective work that goes into figuring out what articulations to do for any given piece. Okay, so we're going to break down all the major articulations, and I will be talking about the sound of some of these. I will talk about the technique with some of them, and there's just a lot of gray area between the two, as you'll see. So détaché, and there are many ways to pronounce it. That's the way I learned it. That just means default bow stroke, a detached stroke, but not too detached. So it's a little bit between legato and staccato, and with no accents. So something like this. So it's where the notes are connecting together, but there's just a little bit of a distinction. Now, legato means that the notes should be played more connected. Well, how is that different from détaché? It's just slightly different. Now, we can get legato, and often do, and composers mark this by slurring. So it's tricky. As slur is a bowing technique, it's also, though, something that you do on a wind instrument. It just means to connect the notes. So notes can be legato without being slurred. So legato, if I play that same D major scale, I'm trying to make it as connected as possible. It's pretty darn close to détaché, frankly, if I do all separate bows, but if I wanted to make it legato, I could slur some notes, and if that was indicated, which it often would be for a composer, then that's what we do. And it is possible to get close to that doing separate bows. The technique that I find helpful, and this is for both French and German bow, though I am more of a French player, is to really think about having some elasticity in those fingers. I really feel like these are just little, kind of like shock absorbers, and I really feel like I'm having my hand underwater and moving back and forth. I've done a whole video on how I approach bowing on a double bass, which I will link up to here. The next major category is staccato. So the dot, the infamous dot. What does it mean? And you'll see dots in all types of music for all instruments. So the definition I learned at Northwestern, where I went to college, is to play the note for 1/2 of its length. So if I were to play that D major scale staccato, staccato also, though, again, muddying the waters, there is a technique that you use on a stringed instrument that's called staccato technique. Now, that's not what most people are thinking of when they say staccato, but if you're hanging out with violinists, especially pretty good violinists, that's what they might think of, although staccato is such a blanket term that we're usually just thinking of short notes. Now, it could be longer than that. This could be staccato. It could be real short. It could even be. I just make sure that when I'm playing staccato, no matter what time period, there's going to be some space, even if it's not much between every note. Another very common way to play staccato notes is with a bow stroke called spiccato. Now, this may be marked. It often isn't. And you have to know who the composer is, the time period, was this a common technique or not. So spiccato, and I need to do a complete video about this, is taking the bow and bouncing it almost like you're bouncing a basketball. The bow is springy, and this generally works about at the balance point of the bow. And depending on the tempo, it may be a little closer, it may be a little further out. You have to just experiment and find that spot. So a spiccato D major, I'll do some repetitions on this, would be. That's a type of staccato in my mind. It's a subcategory of staccato, but it also refers to a bowing technique. And to muddy the waters more, there are different lengths that you'll do spiccato, and they depend largely on the composer and the time period. We string players generally talk about 3 categories of spiccato. There's what you call Mozart spiccato, Beethoven spiccato, and Brahms spiccato. And just like in my mind, there's a spectrum of long to short articulations. The Mozart would be the shortest, and it would be kind of like a V shape when you're coming down on the string. The Beethoven would be a little bit longer and probably a little bit heavier, or yes, a little bit heavier. And then Brahms would be much longer, almost like you're taking a paintbrush and painting the sound on. So we've got our Mozart spiccato. We've got our Beethoven spiccato. I'm playing a little bit more hair on the string for the Beethoven. I'm probably playing a little stronger as a result dynamically. And I'm just letting the bow travel a little bit more, my arm travel a little bit more than the Mozart. The Mozart is much more like bouncing a ball. Now Brahms, I was just in a conversation recently where someone was saying there's really no such thing as a short note in Brahms, which got me thinking. And so Brahms spiccato, it would be like quote unquote spiccato a lot of the time. It's going to be much more where the hair of the bow isn't probably going to leave the string much or at all. It's really much more of like a teacup saucer kind of shape. So that D major scale. Some people call this stroke enf because it's on and off at the same time. I like to think of it being on the string, but I stay relaxed, and as a result, there's just a little bit of air at the ends of the notes. Because if it was completely connected, it'd be something like a détaché stroke, which I'm not trying to do in this case. Now, you might see dots, you might not. You might see these little wedges, you might not. It just all depends on context, composer, who the editor was, all those things. So you just have to kind of know when you see eighth notes or faster, what typically happens in that time period with that composer. Now, one you're almost never going to see marked, or it might have dots or it might have wedges, but it's really down to the tempo of the piece, is Sautillé. That's when the tempo is so fast that your bow is going to start jumping just on its own. And again, I need to do a whole video on off the string strokes like this, or maybe partner up with someone who does them better than me. This is actually a very relaxed stroke, and it's back to that legato concept that I was mentioning, where the fingers are kind of like shock absorbers. I find that if I can just keep that sort of outlook and mindset, it really lets this stroke just kind of happen. And I very much feel like I'm on the string. I'm not trying to take the bow off the string, but just as a result of the speed, the bow is going to jump. And it's pretty fun once you get it going. And by the way, some of these strokes, even if you're not going to play a lot of Sautillé, if you can develop that stroke, it's going to have a benefit to all other aspects of bow technique. The next big category in my mind is accents. So we are putting emphasis on the beginning of the note. And we can have very long notes that are accented, very short notes that are accented. And you'll hear all these different terms like marcato, martelé, sforzando piano. To me, those all are kind of within the world of accent. So, and then you'll see sometimes accents written that look just like a little decrescendo. You'll see some that look like a little hat on top of the note. Context, context, context. Who was the composer? What was the style of the time? What was the tradition? So with an accent, you're going to be front loading the note somehow. So, and then again, thinking about consonants and vowels, these are probably mostly going to be consonants. There are really different ways to front load the note. There can be like ta, or there can be da, or there can be wah. If it's written as an accent, I am generally thinking an articulate beginning and then some sort of falling away of the sound. If it's written S, F, Z, or some variant of that sforzando, and there are many other sort of terms like that, I'm thinking more of a wah. So here would be a D major accent. Some people might call this a marcato stroke or a martelé stroke, a hammered stroke. And again, think about the words, think about it's just a variation on that kind of sound in my mind. So if I wanted to do something a little more martelé, maybe it would be like, I'm kind of getting a little string noise in there. It's like if a brass player is playing and you sort of heard that brassiness to the sound. If it was sforzando, I'm thinking more wah, so I'm thinking, and technically I'm thinking more bow speed for the sforzando, and I'm thinking more bow weight for the accent. So here would be a D major sforzando. Now you're rarely going to hear that many sforzandos in a row. You may hear that many accents in a row. By and large, you'll see sforzandos more like once in a while, and accents not on every note, hopefully. Now the infamous line, what does it mean? We call these tenuto markings, and you will see lines written all over the place, and sometimes it means to play them super duper connected. Generally, it means to put a little bit of emphasis. The word tenuto actually means to hold, but in reality, when I see those lines marked, there is some sort of emphasis put on the note. Now you might see lines with accents. Okay, so how do we do that? For that, I am thinking connected but accented. So that's where my brain typically goes, unless I get information from elsewhere. There is then a bow technique called portato that allows you to do tenuto. I don't know if I've ever seen the word portato written as a request from a composer, but it is something that you'll do a lot. Cellists, for whatever reason, are kind of notorious for portato. It can be used to kind of hide shift, so I guess as we get to the bigger instruments, that's useful. But portato is having connection between the notes, but putting a little bit of emphasis in the beginning of the note. Very, very useful bow stroke for practicing, for just developing your phrasing and expressivity, and I've done a video on that, which I will link up to here. But let's just take that D major scale, and I'll do 2 portatos on each bow. Or I could do 4 portatos. And again, I'm using this coda bow, this marquee bow, really nice and responsive and well balanced. Yeah, dig it. I find that for portato, I am thinking weight for getting those sounds. I'm not thinking speed so much. So I'm trying to keep the speed the same and just put the weight in. I may change the speed slightly. That speed weight placement is always this sort of moving target as you're working on these different bow strokes. By the way, if you don't like the sound that you're getting as you're working on one of these bow strokes, those are the variables to play with. Change the speed, change the placement, change the amount of weight, or change all three. And a great way to see how that all is working is to just park yourself in front of a mirror. For many of these, we can do hooked bowings. So you'll often see a couple of notes that have a slur, but a dot or a dash, or maybe not, but you know to do a hooked bowing on those. And that's very common, like a... are all over the place, and orchestral music and all that kind of good stuff, they might be totally connected. Or might be really short. One of the best resources I've ever found for really practicing your hooked bowings is the wonderful book Strokin'. I've done an entire video about that. I will link up to here. All right, let's take a look at 3 different pieces from 3 different time periods and understand how to apply articulation. And I love just pulling these off of the internet. It's great to get parts like this for videos like this because this part has no information whatsoever. So this is Handel Messiah, the famous Messiah. I've played so many times, and you don't see any dynamics, you don't see any dots, you don't see any dashes, you see nothing. So you have to understand the time period. In this age we live in, you can just go listen to recording and kind of understand and watch bowings and all that. But we have a few clues that are left by Handel Grave. That is a very slow tempo. So I am going to play this first note, Tenuto. I'm not going to decrescendo. He didn't mark it. Number one. Number two, I've played this so many times that I know that we typically sustain the full value on that note, and I also happen to know that we play this forte, even though this part doesn't say that. Now, this next part, starting in the second bar, we have no hooked bowings marked, but we often do hooked bowings. Now, why would you do hooked bowings, or why would you not do hooked bowings? Well, let's try it without hooked bowings. So I'll just do all separate bows. Now, you may notice that I'm not playing the rhythm on the page. It's one of the performance practices that was done in the Baroque era, but I know that I need to double dot. So when I play them separate, there's quite a gap. How about if I hook them? Okay, I'm not working as hard when I hook, but there are a couple of dangers. One is that I run the risk of not being as strong out here at the tip as I am at the frog. I've worked long and hard in my life to compensate for that, but that's just a reality. Then there's a little more connection possible with the notes, although I know that we just about always put a space in here these days when we play this, but if I wanted to really sustain that dotted quarter, I would play it probably hooked. But there's also a little bit of excitement of getting back to the frog, and there's an excitement of watching the whole string section and hearing the whole string section do that. So that might be a reason why I would not hook and play separate. But I just know, even though it's not marked at all, that this part of the Messiah, you're going to put space. Now, we get into the Allegro Moderato, and this is a great example of articulations. Nothing is marked, so you might think that you're going to play this next part. But if I had walked in and played Messiah like that, back when I did a lot of Messiah, that would be the last time I was asked to play Messiah, because that is not how you play this type of quarter note, eighth note passage work in the Baroque era in music of Handel or Bach. What you typically do when you're in an allegro tempo is play the quarters with a little bit of space. And then you go somewhere with the half note. Again, not marked at all on the page, but we just know to do that. And then the eighth notes are going to be quite connected. By and large, I am not a Baroque specialist, if that's not obvious. But I'm going to think little space, then connected, then short on the quarters, then. I never want to just sit on that half note. I always want to be going forward, possibly coming back, but just going somewhere, not just sitting there like a bump on a log. Then I need to connect these next eighth notes. I might need to adjust where I am in the bow. And in Baroque music in general, I'm going to play a little bit further out in the bow. I might even use a different bow I have over there on the wall. And that's just a general rule that I know to apply to my approach for bowing and articulation in music of Handel, Bach, and composers of the Baroque era. Next, let's take a look at a firmly romantic composer, Brahms too. And like I said earlier, it is debated about whether there are any short notes in Brahms. So I'm going to take that in mind here. So the opening of Brahms 2, I cannot think of a greater piece for exploring legato playing. I want utter connection here. So I'm going to make sure that there's no space. I might play, but I'm always going to look around the bass section and see what the other players are doing. And very frequently we play this open A, because the piece is just starting off. We don't need any sort of like disturbance in the force with the vibrato on that low A. So I'm just thinking total connection. And now I want to prep. I will close the D because it's kind of a faux pas to play D's open. And I'm just thinking connection. Now, you'll notice in this IMSLP part, measure 13 has a rest, but we often fill that in because we look at the cellos and what they do, and Brahms didn't have low notes for his bass section. I think that's right. So there are a lot of things that we take down just because Brahms obviously wanted it. He just didn't have bass players that could do it. This next passage that is at 54, which we often play for orchestra auditions, the very end of this slurred passage is a D. This D, but if you have an extension, you'll almost always take that down. And this passage is a great example of something that goes from complete legato to having much more separation as you continue. So we start, I think, down normally on this A. I'm still thinking legato. Now here, I have dots. If this was Mozart, it might be something like that. With Brahms, I'm thinking much more like a paintbrush kind of stroke. So that sort of brushy, and then total connection. And then sforzato, I whacked it like an accent at first. I really do want to think more of like wow when I get there. Last up, let's take a look at something from the 20th century, Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. And this one is not freely available online, but this is from the wonderful International Society of Bassists Journal. And I'll look at Hal Robinson's fingering. And this is back when he was the principal bass of the National Symphony before Philadelphia, now retired. So this is from back in the day. But a great example of a different era, and just knowing, okay, Shostakovich, this is we're getting into this giant militaristic kind of sounding part of Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony, and this is going to be connected. And I'm going to play, I'm thinking much more like a brass player now. I'm thinking much more strident in my sound, almost pushing the boundaries of getting my bass rattling. I don't want it to rattle, but I want to be heading toward rattling. And I know from listening to this and from playing it many times, these notes are going to be connected, but just not 100% connected. I'm not going to play, I need a little more. So I would think of that as a martelé kind of stroke. A real tangible way to think of martelé is I actually feel the muscles in my upper arm engage a little bit. I can feel my shoulders and back getting into the stroke a little bit more for something like this. And then these separate notes, I am not even hinting at doing any sort of spiccato or anything like that. It is just into the string. and very just in your face and just connected but articulate. And I'm thinking lots of dan tika dan tika dan tika dan tika dan tika dan tika 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 dan. Those are the type of consonant sounds I'm going for. Why? Because that's common in Shostakovich, and when you listen, you hear that, and when you watch a recording, when you experience it yourself, that's just the context that we play this piece. It's so easy as a bass player, or really for any musician, to take the easy route and just kind of like get close to what's on the page. I find that if I push myself and really develop capacity and work on the art of exaggeration, that it allows me to do so many more things in music, and we have a whole video about that linked up here. Check it out, and we'll see you in the next one.